tell us what's happening downstate. The down the valley we don't know much about. They found he was not a rural versus urban whiner. He gets involved to make good things happen instead. Bill is a third-generation Valley resident who attended Simon Fraser University and was graduated from Lewis and Clark in '76 with a BS in Business Administration. Equipped with that, he returned to Medford and began work for CSC Incorporated, a family corporation and holding company for Medford Fabrication. Bill is president of the corporation. Actually, I note that the Small Business Association gave them the Exporters of the Year award in Oregon in 1990. Mr. Thorndike's Bill's Vita makes me want to get busy. There are 26 items here, mostly organizations where Bill had a leadership role. A sampling. Fellow American Leadership Forum. I think I heard Don Frisbee telling him to talk about that experience. Secretary, Association of Oregon Industries. Director, the Oregon Community Foundation. It's an Oregon foundation. I wonder if you have to drive up here or if they come down there sometimes. Maybe you can tell us about that. We do think it all happens here sometimes. Director, Arts Council, Southern Oregon. Trustee and past president, Southern Oregon State College Foundation. Co-chair, School to Work Opportunity Steering Committee. Incoming president, Medford Jackson Chamber of Commerce. And I see here, hidden in the list, member of the Arlington Club of Portland. According to Kim Bark McCall, that makes you a decision maker here too. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Thorndike.
Greetings from area code 541. Good news for printers and those capable of reprogramming PBX systems. Members of my family have traveled to Portland during these last 70 years by over 8 hours of winding Highway 99 to 5 hours on Interstate 5 to 1 hour by air between our new international airports. My family's 51-year-old steel fabrication company counts customers in Riddle, Eugene, Dallas, Portland, Oregon, Chicago, Charlotte, Los Angeles, Tokyo, Jakarta, and Brussels, served from our facilities in Medford and White City. I am privileged to be working on lowering Oregon's workers' compensation costs through an appointment to the board of directors of SAFE Corporation, to working for a strong economy on the executive board of Associated Oregon Industries, and for a healthy community as a trustee of the Oregon Community Foundation and as a senior fellow of the Oregon chapter of the American Leadership Forum. Finally, I am proud to be a stall boy for my wife, or more exactly, for her 3 horses. Each weekend at about 6:15 in the morning, I can expect a known quantity of work, an expectation for quality, and the knowledge that no matter how good a job I do, that I will face a similar challenge the next morning. As you now know, I lead a great Oregon lifestyle. Since accepting this invitation, I have talked to a number of Oregonians to help shape the message. I have relied on retired University of Oregon journalism professor Ken Metzler's 1986 book, The Best of Oregon, from Timberline Press. In talking with Ken, I understand this book is not in print anymore, but you might be able to find it at PALS. Ken, along with a number of Oregon writers, offers the premise that we are a state that dares to be different. Ken observes that we are proud of New Jersey Senator Dayton's comments in 1840 about the United States even wanting Oregon. He said, "With the exception of a few river valleys, the whole of Oregon country was as irreclaimable and barren a waste as the desert of the Sahara." Senator McDuffie of South Carolina said he wouldn't give a pinch of snuff for the whole territory. And finally, the Louisville Times stated, "Of all the countries upon the face of the earth, Oregon is one of the least favored by nature. Russia has her Siberia, and England has her Botany Bay. And if the United States should ever need a country to which to banish her rogues and scoundrels, the utility of such a region as Oregon would be demonstrated. And to think of recent times when we were chided on only asking people to visit but not stay. Bill Haas, Medford-Jackson County Chamber of Commerce executive, refers to me as one of the ambassadors to the North. Among my greatest rewards is to appreciate all that Oregon has to offer. Ken Metzer states, most Oregonians suspect that the state will be neither an industrial mecca nor a vast park. So the debate centers on how to achieve the most agreeable mix of the two, where to draw the line. I helped to draw it by driving 99 West from Portland to Eugene, getting off the freeway at Goshen, and finally taking the direct route from Canyonville through Tiller Trail on to Medford. Senator Packwood, on his 97th trip to Jackson County a month ago, commented that many of you believe all roads lead to Portland. He said that as he travels the state, he gets to hear the questions, and from the different questions, he learns the answers. The 1994 Winter Journal of Oregon Humanities looked at the two Oregons. David Milholland, in his closing article, Urban and Rural Values in Oregon, asks, have we Oregonians become far less secure in our shared vision of the state, past, present, and future? Have we come to regard our fellow citizens almost in stereotypical terms, glossing over our common heritage? I truly believe Oregon Humanities Director Richard Lewis's statement that both rural and urban Oregon are interdependent and close. His comment, and I quote, one of America's oldest struggles has been between the jobs, comforts, and educational opportunities in urban areas and the natural beauty, local familiarity, and enduring character of rural life. David Frohmeyer reminded us in 1992 that there are two Oregons that are very different in their outlook and capacity to cope. My caveat to fellow Black Tornado Frohmeyer, as represented in last Sunday's Medford Mail Tribune article entitled Overwhelmed, speaking of growth in small towns of the Rogue Valley, comes from Eric Dittmer, water resource expert and teacher at Southern Oregon State. He comments, everybody has had 3 or 4 cars ahead of them at a stop sign. People are beginning to see that our valley has enough concerns to share in addition to our geology and climate to call itself a community. Our challenges and opportunities continue to blend. One possible answer being put forth by Governor Kitzhaber would be to have 2 state employees working as a team in both the Rogue Valley and Salem to assist large and small municipalities in creating workable land use plans for the future. Jeff Freegold, a key bank economist, calls it bright lights and small towns for the young professionals working successfully with their multiple phone lines. Chancellor Joe Cox refers to it as the information highway, with on and off ramps throughout Oregon. The economy of the mind doesn't much care about distance. Perhaps it gives us and future Oregonians a motive to diversify our economy away from those pleasant river valleys before they lose their charm. Before looking at the numbers, some messages from non-urban Oregon that we need to keep in mind while we're working towards understanding. 1, income levels do differ between urban and rural Oregon. Rural Oregon's mix of ages are more stratified with older and younger, poorer Oregonians. Many people in rural Oregon like or love living off land's natural resources. They are farmers, loggers, and miners. Rural Oregonians cherish water as their lifeblood and probably better appreciate its value more than people in Portland. Some are troubled by the thought of smiling fish at the mouth of a river while their land goes dry. Rural Oregonians live with inequities in infrastructure, microwave phone lines, inadequate water, sewer, and roads. There seems to be a point when the density of population produces liberal solutions of government stepping in and solving for its citizens, further developing into various governments working with or against each other to solve things. Democratic or Republican conservative rural governments rarely have the chance or the resources not to work it out. Conversations between each other are an integral part of addressing problems in rural Oregon. County commissioners constantly read the temperature and experience the barometric pressure of their constituents' minds. We have created financing mechanisms for governments that further tilt towards urban collection methods. How does rural Oregon respond to a system based on payroll and income taxes? How does urban Oregon like paying for rural government? Whose golden rule is it anyway? Rural Oregon's roots are that of monoculture, while urban Oregon has developed multiculturally since World War II. This 50-year jump accentuates old problems being played out in the rest of the state, while statewide and urban policy is focused on gains made a generation ago. Consider the grocery manager in Portland knowing what to stock to meet his or her neighborhood demand. What does the same manager in Medford know when its multicultural mix is not defined by neighborhoods, but occurring at random throughout the city? While these messages may be interesting, it may be better to share some numbers that show how urban Oregon, for the sake of this discussion, defined as Washington, Multnomah, and Clackamas County, compared with the remaining counties and state averages as a whole. My source book, better this way, is Oregon, A Statistical Overview, 1994, created by Rebecca Reed and student Red Harmon of the Southern Oregon Regional Services Institute at Southern Oregon State, with grant support from the Hannah Robertson and Floyd Dement charitable funds of the Oregon Community Foundation, and published in January. Rhett doing this project as his capstone project for graduation. By the way, the book is available from Southern Oregon Regional Service Institute for $20. As you may know, the May 1993 report supported by the Oregon Business Council on Oregon Values and Beliefs found that Oregonians share the core values of families, employment, education, and livability on a statewide basis. To know what is different requires looking at the numbers. SourceC utilized census data and other sources to compare 165 areas county by county. Thankfully for both you and me, I will share only 12 that may shed light on these two Oregons. First, let's keep in mind the scoreboard. Keep in mind that Oregon's urban counties represent 38.5% of the state's population and 42.4% of its registered voters. Underlying the differences between rural and urban Oregon may be that of age. Oregonians who are 65 or older make up 14% of the state. Yet, out of 36 counties, Multnomah is 32nd, Clackamas 34th, and Washington 35th, with only 10.4%. Curry County on the southern Oregon coast is 24.1. Meanwhile, the percent of population 0 to 17 statewide, 26.3%, with the metro areas within 2% of the mean. But with Curry County at 20%, Tomorrow County at 32.5%. From 1980 to 1990, our state's population grew by 7.9%. It is projected to grow by 18.1% during the 90s. Washington County was first in the 80s, expected to be second in the 90s to Deschutes, which will grow by 42.3%, and Jefferson County projected to be right behind Washington County with a 33.7% increase. Clatsop, Gilliam, Harney, and Sherman losing population, with Sherman expected to contract by almost 9%. Inflation-adjusted household income for the 80s statewide fell by almost 5%. Multnomah County and Clackamas County by approximately 2%, and Washington County by 3.5%. By comparison, 16 counties fell by more, with Coos County losing 19.4% and Morrow and Harney County 22%. Transfer payments, which are payments to persons for whom no current services are performed, statewide represent 17.3% of the income of citizens of Oregon. Multnomah is 33rd, Clackamas 35th, and Washington 36th, with only 10.8%. In contrast, Josephine County is first with 27.7% of its personal income from transfer payments, followed by Tillamook with 27.2% and Curry at 26.5%. Statewide, in 1989, the poverty rate was 12.4%. 26 counties had a higher percent. Multnomah County, 25th, Clackamas, 35th, and Washington, 36th, with only 6.6%. Wheeler County, the highest, 20.9%, and to the east of us, Jefferson, third, at 18.6% in poverty. Less than high school education, 25 years or older. Statewide, 18.5% of our citizens. 27 counties being worse. Metro counties having less of this problem, with Multnomah at 29th, Clackamas 34th, and Washington 35th at 11.9%. On the other hand, Wheeler and Malheur at 30%, and Hood River at 28.6% of its citizens in this age group not having attained a high school education. Government employment as a percent of workforce, statewide 17.2%, less than 2 out of 10. 26 counties have a higher percentage. Multnomah County is 32nd, Clackamas 33rd, and Washington 35th, with only 8.4%. Wheeler County in eastern Oregon, 58.5% work for the government. For comparison, to the south, Marion County, 27.1%. Thinking of who pays, let's look at labor force participation rates. Statewide, 64.4%. 6 counties higher, first being Washington, 72.8%, Clackamas second at 69.5%, and Multnomah third, 67.5%. The bottom, Josephine County, 52.5%, Wheeler, less than 50%, and Curry, less than 50% of the population in the workforce. Disparity between assessed poverty valuation affecting how Oregonians can finance government. Statewide per capita, there's $45,000 worth of property. Clackamas County has over $50,000 per capita. Washington, over $50,000. Multnomah, $46,000. The lowest, Union County, with less than $30,000, followed by Malheur and Umatilla, also all below $30,000 per capita. Finally, vehicle miles per capita. Statewide in 1992, 9,492 miles, with 27 counties being higher. But Washington County was 31st with 7,800, followed by Clackamas at 77,790 miles, Multnomah at 7,415 miles. Again, statistics can tell you anything. In Gilliam County, on a per capita basis, the amount of mileage is 117,323 miles. Sherman County, 80,000, and Morrow, 28,000. I hope these snapshots prove the point that while we all call ourselves Oregonians, we each live our lives compared to others under slightly different circumstances. One-size-fits-all solutions oftentimes finds us not offering the best solution to people with very different challenges. That leads us to politics and the existing situation of rural politicians in our state inhabiting positions of power in both legislatures and the governor's office. In discussing this topic with fellow Oregonians, we quickly went beyond the out of Portland similarity and focused on similarities in philosophy that created a critical mass. The entrepreneurial spirit that these small and medium-sized business people from Grants Pass to La Grande bring to decision-making may be the answers voters were looking for. Remember that citizens of rural Oregon are asked to go from amateur to pro status at a much quicker rate than urban Oregon. Perhaps they remember their roots. An analogy can be drawn with a student graduating from a small high school. You have a much better chance of sampling everything, seldom excel in anything, but have a generalist grasp of things that promote standing up for what you believe in and standing out of the way when you realize that change is going to happen anyway. This can be taken to the extreme when an urban friend proudly mentions the name of someone from my neck of the woods. Well, you must know. Oh, yes, I respond, our community is so small, we serve on 6 boards together. And by the way, did I mention how our families are related? Richard Hensley, a fellow ambassador and mentor from Medford, related to me the philosophy of the Dean of Ambassadors, the late Glenn Jackson, for whom all of Western Valleys call their own. Glenn lived by the principle that if you had thin skin on parochial issues, but thick skins on issues that benefited the state as a whole, you could be a successful civic leader. A wonderful practitioner of this, he rarely used his power only for his own self-interest, but worked until it benefited many. This is not to say that rural Oregonians will not, on occasion, withstand the pain of raising a parochial issue to make a point, but they know that they do it at the peril of not being listened to on wider issues. Hensley noted that in 40 years of living in Oregon, he has not seen a leader outside of Portland ignore Portland, while some leaders from Portland have become overly absorbed with the city's issues. Again, maybe an outsider considers the consequences of upsetting the balance of power better than those coming from the densest populated areas, particularly at a time when suburban voters can affect the ultimate outcome. This has interesting implications at a time when, for better or worse, most of the state's more divisive initiatives and referenda have their roots not in traditional rural Oregon, but in the metro counties, suburbia, and exurbia. Gordon B. Dodds, Oregon historian, quoted in The Best of Oregon, said, "Oregon's uniqueness lies in its success in retaining the commonplace and its adventuresomeness in pursuit of the ordinary. We exhibit an unusual tolerance for newcomers and for new ideas. Our newest immigrants often remind us of those basic Oregon characteristics of independence and home. Oregon is, to me, the discovery of a great microcosm of America. Roughly 1% of the population, and in the mid-range of most ratings, it has been a place to test a new product or a new idea at the polls. Our strength lies in balance we are constantly in tension over. Water to land, forest to desert, and cities to wide open spaces. The essence of Oregon for me is captured in the face I remember from 20 years ago at Lewis and Clark College. From that kind and humble man, words written in the mid-1980s define our home. I would like to close with Bill Stafford's poem, An Oregon Message, first published in the New Yorker magazine. An Oregon Message. When we first moved here, pulled the trees in around us, curled our backs to the wind, no one had ever hit the moon. No one. Now our trees are safer than the stars, and only other people's neglect is our precious and abiding shell, pierced by meteors, radar, and the telephone. From our snug place we shout religiously for attention in order to hide. Only silence or evasion will bring dangerous notice. The hovering hawk of the state, or the sudden quiet stare and fatal estimate of an alerted neighbor. This message we smuggle out in its plain cover, to be opened quietly. Friends everywhere, we are alive. Those moon rockets have missed millions of secret places. Best wishes, burn this. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. The first question is going to be asked by Susan Stone and the second by John Leeper, and you'll see cards on the table there where you can, if you're shy like me, send your questions forward.
Thank you. You did a great job of describing some of the differences. A question I have is, how do we get past the emotional barriers between Portland and the rest of the state so that we're able to help each area get the kind of help and growth that they need?
I'm not sure if it was broadcast up here, but Russell Sadler, in his commentary that ran in Southern Oregon yesterday, called it the Newberry Law. Again, this concept that the distance from Medford to Salem is much shorter than Salem to Medford. And I think that a lot of it is going to be driven by trying to break down those barriers. And I personally have a lot of faith in our educational systems and in the state that we're creating today. I think that the internet, I think that Oregon EdNet, I think that the opportunities for us to share ideas, not necessarily face-to-face, but maybe camera-to-camera, will help improve that. But again, I think that's the key, is to find out that really the differences aren't that much different. When I was first asked to do this, I almost used the analogy that to a certain degree, regardless, we're all in the same vehicle. I might be in the back seat, you might be in the front seat, but we're all going kind of the same place. And so maybe we just have to pay more attention that we're in the same car, going through Gilliam County.
John Leeper, member. As a follow-on, what do you see as, in addition to what you stated here, as possible outreach programs within the state to better address this problem of we versus them, Portland versus the rest of the state?
Well, I think that without a doubt, I think the program I would put up high is American Leadership Forum that Don Frisbee and John Gray helped bring to our area, as probably being the kind of thing that we need to encourage. Both Don and John, particularly Don, really felt that an interesting phenomena has created itself. We've empowered so many groups of people, different types of people in different parts of the state, and that the key is to build that network. The American Leadership Forum, the Camp Odyssey programs, those types of endeavors, I think that if we as Oregonians feel as though those need to be utilized throughout the state, I think we need to encourage that. It's interesting, even with the American Leadership Forum, even though I understand that today's, or Class 9, is meeting in La Grande, I believe, we've had an awful difficulty getting them down into Southern Oregon.
Sally McCracken, member. That leads me to, you didn't respond to the question of whether on the Community Foundation that you always came to Portland, and I know the answer, so I would like you to say it.
Thank you, boss. Chair McCracken correctly brings up the point that through the Oregon Community Foundation, each year they travel outside of the urban area, and this year we'll be meeting in Salem. Last year it was in Portland. It's surprising, though, in talking with many people that do serve on state commissions and councils, right or wrong, it is easy to get to Portland, and while many of us would love to have you come and visit, it isn't that much of a problem for many of us to visit, to actually meet in Portland. We're normally there before the meeting starts, and we normally last through the meeting before we leave.
Don Barney, member. Bill, last year I had the pleasure of working with you and other community leaders down there and discovered that you have your real growth management problems as we do here. What would you say you've learned from what's happened up here in terms of your future down there, and what can we learn from you in Medford area?
I think that the interesting thing that we're dealing with in Southern Oregon at this point, and we're hoping to be able to develop the resources to address the question, is that of capacity. I know that in the metro area that you've spent a lot of resources and efforts in trying to really assess how many are too many or how many should be someplace else. In our area, we're just kind of at the forefront of trying to develop that process so that we have some good information. We're looking right now primarily at water as being the critical issue, but there's no question that we need to come up with some better mechanisms. One of the things that I like to share with people is that in the early 1980s, when that recession, or what we call a depression, in Southern Oregon hit, it pretty well just stopped growth in most of Oregon. And that the growth that you now see when you travel through Medford, which is quite a bit, really from my standpoint is catch-up time from the early 1980s. And I think that, again, we are now pushing the envelope of our urban growth boundaries where literally people are coming out of the woods either in support of growth or fighting growth. So again, I think we're in the same types of situations as you are in Portland and Southern Oregon, and let's hope that we come up with processes by which we listen to as many Oregonians as possible before we make decisions.
I'm Bill Crane, a member. Mr. Thorndike, for the past decade at least, Oregon has been engaged in remarkable school reform for K through 12, and in '91, of course, we had great legislation passed, which has been hailed all around the country. And as you know, because I know of your active involvement in your area, good things like school-to-work transition activities and the certificates of initial and advanced mastery. My biggest concern is the requirement for students to become proficient in foreign languages. All of those things are coming under attack, and it's all from members of the legislature who are not from Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah counties. What are folks down there so scared of, and why are they so mad?
I don't think there are very many people. I think you're certainly hearing from a very vocal minority who believe passionately in some things that they would like out of education that I'm not sure any place in the country will be able to settle that question of basically the religious rights interest in shaping of values. The interesting thing, I think, is that when you sit down with Oregon businessmen or you sit down with parents, that basically we all hope for the same things from our children, that they can be able to apply knowledge constructively. And I think that we need to get beyond some of the rhetoric, and I think that basically what we are hearing in Salem is just more of the sabers rattling. I think that you can make an interesting point, though, that when in 1989 and 1990, as we embarked on education reform in the state of Oregon, I served on the 11th Task Force of House Bill 3565 dealing with school-to-work transition. It was interesting. This committee was formed 2 years after the bill passed. No one had defined school-to-work. Jerry Fisher from Hewlett-Packard co-chaired that committee with J.D. Hoy, and we spent a year and a half attempting to define it by bringing in as many people as possible. And I think that what we're seeing right now in Salem is very good, because that bill that was constructed was a combination of ideas of many different legislators. We now are several years beyond that. That concept needs to be tightened up and improved, just as none of us expect to be able, or personally, I'm not interested in going back and buying a 1990 CD or a 1990 computer today. I would prefer to buy a new, improved product. And I think that's basically what the legislature is trying to do. So I think that the saber rattling, a few legislators who are basically imparting a philosophy, maybe not so much a constructive criticism on the plan, will certainly have their say, will be listened to, but I have faith in our legislatures and in Oregonians knowledge of the type of mind that our children will have to be able to be competitive in the next century.
Mr. Thorndike, Steve Shell, member. Many of us share a sense of place or a sense of value or community, but not all of us have 70 or 80 years in one place to do that. Many of us are very new to the state. Particularly, that seems to be a situation in your area. You have a great number of Californians coming in and settling in Josephine and Jackson County and Curry County as well. How do you find that changes the situation that you have to deal with in terms of education, in terms of shared values, in terms of indoctrinating them versus getting indoctrinated by the values that they bring with them?
It's a good question. It was interesting. The book that I utilized, Ken Metzer's book, was written in 1986, so I had this kind of, it was probably written in 1985, and so I tracked down Ken in Eugene and called him, and I said, if you were to rewrite this book, is there anything you would change, or is there anything that was wrong? And he said that the thing that he would emphasize even more, and I did in my speech, is that for right or wrong, it's the new Oregonian who probably better instills some of those basic values that maybe after 70 years I'm starting to lose in my family. So I thought that was an interesting point, that as you drive through Grants Pass, of course, their big banner says it's the climate. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Did that answer your question, or it's close? Good.
Jim Zarin, member, you alluded to growth in your area, and I'm thinking of what seems to be one of the most divisive issues in this urban-rural split, and that's land use. Dare I say LCDC, et cetera. I'm curious, with growth that's happening in your area, whether there's a changing sense of the usefulness of a state presence throughout the state on those issues, as opposed to other parts of the state that are not growing and struggling. There seems to be a kind of outstate resistance to LCDC, statewide land use planning, et cetera, which has, of course, come up this legislative session. I'm wondering if the growth in I think you mentioned people stopping at stop signs with cards ahead of them, whether that's changing the view on the importance or the usefulness of having a state presence throughout the state on those issues.
I know as a businessman and as a free trader, I like to break down as many barriers as possible, but I like an even playing field. And I think land use is one of those areas where I'm very hopeful that the state can continue to play an important role in keeping that balance, because there's probably no issue where more people with different interests are at the table. But I think that, again, the problem is trying to come up with a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that basically what we're really seeing 20 years into our land use planning activities is recognition that, right or wrong, that maybe some of the assumptions that were made 10 or 15 years ago were wrong, that people have certain expectations as to lot sizes, as to what they want. So I'm hoping, and again, what I was alluding to with Governor Kitzhaber's proposal, that we're a state of very intelligent people. We just sometimes need to know how to talk to each other and make sure that the question is phrased correctly and an answer can come forth. So I think we can get around that, but it's required, I think, the patience of Job to do it.
Bob Wheel, member, you referred a couple of times, sir, to water as being the primary issue in your area. Are you talking about water for fishing, scenic, recreation, hydropower? Would you elaborate a little bit?
Yes. This is our first year in 9 years of normal water in the Rogue River Valley. That means that with any luck, by September 1st, we will have had 18 inches of rain. Last year, we had less than 9 inches of rain, which in most books you would refer to as a desert. So there's that basic, when people think of water outside of Portland, they think of it in every single possible way. Scenic value, transportation, the ability to sustain life, to sustain agriculture. It's originally to produce power in our area. So it's absolutely, I guess, the critical issues, I think statewide, are that of water, of transportation, and education. Those are the three that I'd almost put in together, but as the old saying goes, people will fight over water and not over whiskey.
Robert Smith, a member. In going down to the legislature and observing the attitude of the newly elected legislators from out counties, it seems they have a punitive attitude towards social services, particularly for the elderly and the young. And I normally would think that the compassion for such people would be equal everywhere. Could you explain this?
I think that maybe the compassion is the same. I think it's the way that it's delivered that is frustrating to some of the legislators. And again, I don't think I probably have a good answer for you on that. Certainly, the rhetoric can be extreme, but I think that probably most of those legislators have a very high regard for the individual. It's just a matter of how we get that money or that resources to them to help.
It's Bill Crane again, and I think I'm not supposed to ask 2 questions, but I thought of a great one. I mean, most people in this room know I have a lot of concern about philanthropy, and you're on the OCF board, and lots of them are there today. We know we have kind of rotten rates of corporate philanthropy in the Portland area compared to nationally. I want to know about corporate and individual philanthropy in your region.
It's very grassroots. I think that a lot of Oregonians don't like to show off their philanthropy. Many Oregonians feel if they do, they have the old fence in front of the house and everybody's going to come by. I think it's interesting to note, I always like to use it as an example, that in Jackson County, our 4-H program on the livestock sales, which is a tremendous joint venture between young people, adults, and businesses, that within our county last year, that those kids raised over $500,000 through their livestock sales. To me, that's really putting philanthropy to work. And so I think that it's out there. I think it can always be improved. I'll share one other thing about me. This will be my 6th and final year of a 6-year sentence on the Jackson County Budget Committee. And to be perfectly blunt, the first 4 years were wonderful because I had this wonderful uncle, Uncle Owen C., paying for everything in our county. And we could be very, very generous. Uncle Owen C. is not so generous anymore, and quite literally, just as we have found that within certain areas of business that they don't have a history of giving, county residents in ONC counties don't have a history of giving either. Our tax rate for county services in Jackson County is 25 cents per thousand. It costs our county 38 cents per thousand to collect our property taxes. It'll be interesting to see how much pain we have to go through before we rebuild that trust with the citizenry to want to buy or purchase those government services that we have taken for granted in the past.
My name is Greg Jackson, City Club member. When this legislative session began this year, the big news story was urban-rural split, urban-rural split. We heard that a lot. When I lived in Medford more than 10 years ago, a lot of the old-timers would talk about a concept called the state of Jefferson. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, yes, yes.
Would you explain that to this metro audience? And the question is, does anybody still talk about the state of Jefferson?
not only talk about it, of course, our public radio network is called Jefferson Public Radio. It's the concept, again, that not only Southern Oregon, but true Northern California both felt disenfranchised from government. And starting, I believe, only about 7 years after Oregon became a state was the concept of Jefferson, of asking Congress to construct the state of Jefferson. As I understand it, the last time it really had half a chance, unfortunately, was on December 6, 1941, when a blockade was put up in Wairika. The following day, something else happened, and that pretty well ended that. But there's still that concept of not being listened to, but I think that's a concept that's fast evaporating. And again, I think you can look at basically that we as Oregonians today are inhabiting, again, our stations of power in Salem with people throughout the state. So I think it's much less, but again, I think, you know, it's a nice concept, I guess, maybe to have the state of Jefferson, but I honestly am afraid that at this point in time, it's probably not the answer. And basic to that is really, right or wrong, as a rural Oregon resident, I need the support of Portland or the support of a major metropolitan area. And as much as I'd like to see Medford in that role between Reading and Roseburg, I don't think that we have the right channels in Bear Creek to accommodate that type of transportation.
Our premier issue is rebuilding community in Oregon, and we really shouldn't talk about it unless we know about it. And you've added to the sum of our knowledge, and I thank you for a very informative talk. Thanks, Bill. And don't forget Greg in the back of the room.
Well, thank you. I hope that was interesting.
Oh, that was fine.
It was great.